YouTube. So today I wanted to go over one of my favorite trips and basically some things that I wish I'd known before I went on this trip.
All you wanna do is gas me. How we end up in the backseat, just trying to get to the bag. We on the same page, you the same way. Only keep the fam around.
Some of you may not know this, but I love to travel, and one of my favorite destinations to date is Cancun, Mexico. While I loved everything about this trip, there were some things that I had to kind of learn along the way. Some things kind of made the trip a little bit more difficult, and if I can, I'm gonna help somebody else who's maybe planning to go and just put some things on your radar for you to look out for. The first thing that you're gonna need to know when you're going to Cancun, likely Mexico in general, is bring cash, all right? Having your credit cards that work out the country is okay, but this is a city where we learned very quickly cash is king, and pesos to be exact. So you haggle for almost everything, and we'll get into some of that later, but even from the time that you step out of the airport and you're getting into a taxi, when you're negotiating your price for your ride to where you're going, unless you've already set it up with the hotel, you're going to be able to negotiate better if you're paying with pesos over dollars. Normally, if you're paying with dollars, they're going to push the conversion fee onto you. So I would recommend coming with some pesos, and it's always best to get those before you're at the airport. Airport exchange rates normally are the worst. So probably second only to exchange rates in the touristy areas. So I would recommend having some pesos on hand. On top of that, everyone who helps you with anything, including your taxi driver, is going to expect a cash tip. How much you tip is up to you, but just know, like, you're in a new place. This is how things are done. You just don't want to put yourself in a bind. They definitely expect to be tipped, so much so that they will take you to an ATM if you need to, so you can tip them. So just avoid any awkward situations and know that you need to have some cash on hand and talk about rates to get wherever you're going. On the point of having cash readily accessible, keep in mind that not only are some of these service workers expecting a cash payment, but some stores will only accept cash payments as well, including the airport. There was a moment where we needed to get one of those forms, I forget what it's called, but basically to get you in and out of the country, and you couldn't pay using a card. We had to stand in a long line at an ATM waiting to get cash so that we could handle affairs at the actual airport. So a lot of established businesses will only accept cash as well. It will just do you a lot of good to have it on hand. With that being said, be prepared to haggle. You can negotiate the price of almost anything, and once you get used to it, that's actually not so bad. And by anything, I mean, you can talk about excursions, you can negotiate shoes, clothes, I mean, almost anything, literally food, especially if you're not planning to drive while you're there. You're really gonna wanna consider brushing up your negotiation skills, and if you speak any Spanish, like any at all, it's going to be more beneficial than trying to do your negotiations purely in English. People do respect you even trying if you only know a little bit of Spanish, and of course if you're very fluent in Spanish, then you're probably not going to be assumed to be just another tourist, so you're probably going to get great rates. But I do want to point out, on the note of negotiating the prices that you pay for things, that you are kind of in a developing country, especially if you go outside of the touristy areas into what's sometimes referred to as the real Mexico. You might consider that you don't want to necessarily pay people sweatshop wages. If we don't support big corporations going overseas and paying people pennies in sweatshop wages, then just consider that we don't also want to go places encouraging sweatshop wages. So I wouldn't try to finesse a hard worker out of, something that they earn. Some things that you might buy could be handmade, and it could have taken somebody a whole day or a half a day to make something. I don't know, to me, like, there is a price that I feel like I should pay for someone's effort. But that's just a social responsibility tip. You can take it or leave it, but I did just want to put that out there. As far as location, so listen, when we went, we stayed in an Airbnb at first, and I have to say, I didn't know a lot about all-inclusive resorts at the time, but if I knew then what I know now, I would have definitely stayed at an all-inclusive resort. The trip was still so fun. Everything was just very exciting, even with us staying at an Airbnb. So the Airbnb we were at was at the Mall of America, and it was really just a straight shot down to the hotel zone. So we were able to catch taxis or buses. And yes, we caught the bus. It was a little ghetto, but you know, we did it and it was fun. It was a great time. But the all-inclusive resorts honestly weren't that much. So, I mean, there were options that were very reasonable at the time. You know, this was a spring break trip, so you know, I was on a college student budget, but honestly, it was pretty reasonable, especially to have all your food and drinks included and you're right in the mix of things. I think that would have definitely been worth at least looking into. So if you're looking at going to Cancun, I would say check out an all-inclusive resort. These days, that's my preferred way of travel. And back then, I honestly just didn't know about it, but the Airbnb was still fun. I don't think that we would have found an all-inclusive for what we paid for the Airbnb, and it was honestly a great stay. We had great hosts. We weren't too far from anything, but to be right in the mix of things and not have to worry about getting back and forth, that would have been nice. And on the tip of getting back and forth, some people will rent a car. I'm nothing on driving in other countries. I don't need that kind of anxiety in my life, but I know that a lot of people do. I'll just say to be careful. I've heard a lot of horror stories about people being antagonized, I guess, by the police, especially when they're foreign in driving. And yeah, I'm just gonna leave that there. So be careful with that. If you do, make sure you're driving according to your P's and Q's and not drawing attention to yourself. Otherwise, we took, like I said earlier, taxis and buses. Ride shares were not really a thing when we were out there. They've had a very hate-hate relationship with ride sharing apps. So sometimes they are operating, sometimes they're not. And even when they are frowned upon. Just from the locals, they would say things like, oh, people will crash into ride share drivers because they're hurting the taxi industry. So when we went, the ride sharing wasn't even an option. So we always rode in a taxi or the bus. As far as the bus, it was very complicated for us because there wasn't really a bus stop. I was expecting what you would see, I guess, more in the States, but there was no real like sign or anything that said bus, right? So one day we're waiting for it and there's this guy, a local, and he sees us just standing around and he's asking like, you know, what are y'all doing? And we're telling him we're trying to catch the bus, but we don't know which bus we're trying to catch or where they going or whatever. Y'all, when I tell you, and keep in mind, this traffic is heavy, right? So these cars are like flying through this little zone. This man walks into the middle of the street and flags a bus down like a taxi. Child, I was through. I said, okay, we can't do this. I ain't gonna be able to do that. I ain't gonna be able to do that. So if we hadn't taken the bus, we wouldn't have met some people who actually helped us get around and ultimately hooked us up for a very inexpensive excursion that was so much fun. The taxis, as mentioned before, once we kind of caught the drift, no one is taking card payments. In fact, on our first night, we hadn't found an ATM that was compatible with our cards. Again, bring cash, because it was tough even finding an ATM that we could work with. The one time we were going somewhere and we just didn't have any more cash and I couldn't get my card to work at any of the ATMs. My friend's car had already been locked out, so it was just a mess when I tell you that. And we were telling a taxi driver this, and the taxi driver let us pay him in gas. Like, he took us to the gas station and we put gas in his car. Like, that was it. Like, I am glad though that we were able to get back, of course, but keep some cash on you. As for excursions, so something that you'll want to keep in mind if this is your first time out is that when you are in the hotel zone or the strip, whatever you want to call it, when you get there, you're going to be bombarded by people coming up to you from alleys offering to sell you excursion packages. 9 times out of 10, it's not a scam. That's just how they do things, and that's very common practice. I know that it can feel very unusual to those of us who aren't used to that, and we're not really used to, you know, for some of us, it just seems like an aggressive sales tactic, but it really is just the norm. There's a lot of those companies offering excursions, and a lot of them are just operating out of like this little alley with a lot of like touristy stuff. It's usually not a scam. I'm not saying that no one is running any game out there. I wouldn't know that. But I am saying that there are a lot of legitimate companies that are actually just walking up to you in an alley selling you an excursion, and you can negotiate with them and get yourself a great rate. In fact, the more people that are in your group, you should be able to get a lower price per person. We were able to get an excursion. Let's see, we booked one before we went there. It was $70 each, $70 US per person. That's before we got to Mexico. So we booked that one online. All in all, it was definitely worth it. That one was a Chichen Itza excursion, and the bus that we took was extremely comfortable. The food was great and everything. But once we got there, we saw there were more options. Almost all these companies are selling the exact same excursions, so we probably could have gotten it for less, but it's all good. We ended up doing another excursion through one of the people that we met on the bus, actually, and that was a great time. That one I think was only like $30 per person. It might have even been a little bit less, and we did pay cash for that though. And before we left, we actually were able to get down to, I don't think it was like $30 per person to do the like dolphin excursion. We didn't have enough time to do it though, unfortunately. So there was that. But if you haggle, and this was during spring break week, so yeah, everyone's gonna get different prices for everything. I'm sure things have inflated since I went, so expect those prices to be a bit higher. But like I said, the more people in your group, the more leverage you have. And then of course, in any negotiation, you are assumed to be paying cash. It's unlikely that you're gonna get much of a break if you are paying with your Visa. So keep that in mind. The last thing I'm gonna leave you with as you're traveling to Cancun is to have fun. You're gonna meet so many people. You're gonna have so much fun. There's so much to do. I definitely would encourage you to go check out a historical monument. Go to Tulum. Go to the beach. Get out of the touristy area if you want, or stay in the touristy area. Just make sure your trip is everything that you wanted out of your vacation. Everything is there for you to get into. If you're on a vacation, you can relax. If it's a hot girl summer, there's definitely ways to get into that, but have fun. Just be committed to a good time. Know that with any trip, there may be things that are unexpected. You might run into some hiccups. To be completely honest, we missed our flight the day that we were supposed to have been leaving, which made us stay an extra 2 days. And we made that 2 days the most fun 2 days. And we had already been having a great time, like no sleep, bus, club, another club. So I'm gonna say, if you're committed to having a good time, you're going to have a good time no matter what. And just know that no matter what happens, you just gotta kind of go with the flow and be safe. Of course, use due diligence, but make some memories, take pictures, and have a blast. Let me know how you like your trip to Cancun, and if you thought any of these tips were useful. If you've been to Cancun and you have more tips to add, please leave them in the comments below. I'll see y'all later.